People walk through life believing they've seen everything, but sometimes a single moment can turn an ordinary day into a story no one ever forgets. This is exactly what happened when a poor little girl, wearing an oversized dress and holding a broken doll, suddenly grabbed the hand of a rich stranger in the middle of a crowded mall and called him Daddy. No one expected what happened next, and certainly not the girl's mother, who fainted moments later. Yet the real story, the truth behind the girl's desperate mistake, began long before that shocking moment, on a day when hope felt like a luxury. The girl's name was Alina, a soft-spoken child with big curious eyes that always held more worry than a child her age should ever know. She lived with her mother Sarah in a tiny rented room behind an old bakery. The walls were thin, the roof leaked when it rained, and most days they had only enough food for a single meal. But despite the struggle, Sarah raised her daughter with love, teaching her that kindness and honesty were worth more than gold. Alina believed her mother with all her heart. Even when she was hungry, even when kids at school laughed at her worn shoes, she always said softly, "Mama, everything will be okay." But Sarah knew deep inside that life was getting harder every month. Sarah worked 2 jobs, cleaning houses in the morning and washing dishes at night. She barely slept. Her hands were cracked from soap water. She never complained. She just smiled at her daughter like everything was under control. But her heart carried a weight she could no longer hide. Bills were overdue, the landlord was threatening to evict them, and Alina's school had sent yet another notice demanding fees they couldn't pay. Still, Sarah pushed on. She had no choice. Alina depended on her, and she depended on hope. One Saturday, after finishing her morning cleaning shift, Sarah needed to buy a few essentials: rice, soap, and medicine for Alina's cough. They walked together to a big shopping mall nearby. It was one of those places filled with shining floors, expensive brands, bright lights, and people who never had to worry about money. Alina loved watching the escalators move up and down, pretending it was magic. She held her mother's hand tightly because the crowd was huge, and she felt small among so many strangers. Sarah tried her best to ignore the stares. People often looked at her clothes, her tired face, her daughter's worn shoes. She wished for one day where she could walk into a place without feeling judged. But she had no time for pride. She needed to get the medicine. As they moved through the mall, Alina's eyes suddenly widened. She stopped walking. Sarah didn't notice at first and took another few steps before turning back. Alina was staring at a tall, well-dressed man who stood near the entrance of a luxury store. He looked to be in his early 40s, in a dark suit, confident posture, neat hair, and calm eyes. He was talking to a store manager, giving instructions with the tone of someone used to being obeyed. He was clearly wealthy, the kind of man who never had to worry about anything, but Alina wasn't staring at his clothes or the store. Her lower lip trembled, her eyes filled with tears. She whispered a single word, a word that made Sarah freeze. "Daddy." Sarah felt her heart twist painfully. She rushed toward her daughter, gently pulling her hand. "Alina, no. Don't say that," she whispered, her voice shaking. But before Sarah could stop her, Alina let go of her mother's hand and ran straight toward the man. The mall was busy, but somehow everything felt silent for a moment. The man turned around, confused, just as Alina wrapped her tiny arms around his leg and pressed her face against him. "Daddy, please take me home." A few people nearby gasped. A group of teenagers started recording on their phones. Some women covered their mouths in shock. The store manager stared with wide eyes, unsure whether to intervene or stay silent. The man looked completely stunned. He bent down slowly, placing a gentle hand on Alina's shoulder. "Little one, do I know you?" he asked softly, his voice calm but unsure. Sarah reached them, breathless and desperate. "I'm so sorry, sir, she didn't mean..." But before she could finish, the man stood up and looked at her. Their eyes met, and something strange passed between them: confusion, recognition, disbelief. Sarah felt the world tilt for a moment. The man's expression shifted, like he was trying to remember something buried deep in his past. Alina still clung to him, tears running down her cheeks. "Daddy, don't leave again," she whispered. Sarah tried to pull her away gently, but the girl held tighter. Mama, look. He came back for us, Alina cried. I told you he would. A painful crack echoed inside Sarah's chest. This was the moment she feared. For months, Alina had asked about her father, where he was, why he left, if he would ever return. And Sarah always said the same thing. He's gone, my love. He chose another life. But she had never revealed the full truth. It was too painful, too complicated, too dangerous. Now that Truth stood a few inches away, wearing an expensive suit and staring at her daughter like she was a ghost from a life. He thought he'd lost forever. Sarah felt dizzy. Her knees weakened, her vision blurred. The last thing she heard before everything went dark was the man whispering her name in shock. Sarah? And she fainted in front of the entire mall. The crowd screamed. Someone called for help. Alina cried. The man froze, but only for a moment. Then he lifted Sarah into his arms like she weighed nothing and shouted for security to clear the way. And just like that, the moment that would change all their lives had begun. The prince, still in disbelief, held Sarah carefully as a security guard led them to a quiet lounge area in the mall. Alina sat nearby, her small hands clutching the lost doll that had been with her for years. She looked between her mother and the man, confusion and hope mingling in her eyes. The air was thick with tension and curiosity, but the prince was calm, trying to process everything. How could a child call him Daddy out of nowhere? How could fate bring this tiny girl into his life in the middle of such a busy place? Sarah slowly opened her eyes. The mall lights seemed brighter, harsher, and more overwhelming than she remembered. Her heart was pounding, her chest felt heavy, and every part of her wanted to run, to hide, to protect her daughter. She had never expected to see this man again, not like this, not here, not now. And yet, here he was, holding her, looking into her eyes as though searching for answers in her very soul. Alina, seeing her mother awake, jumped up. "Mama, are you okay?" she asked, her voice trembling. Sarah managed a weak nod, trying to reassure her, though she could barely breathe. I'm fine," she said, though her voice was shaky. She looked at the man and realized she needed to face him. She needed to explain everything, or maybe she just needed to survive this encounter. The prince took a seat and gestured for Sarah to sit beside him. "Sarah," he said, his voice low and steady. I didn't expect this. I never imagined." His words faltered as he tried to form coherent thoughts. "Is this your daughter?" Sarah's heart raced. Every word felt like a test, every second a trial. "Yes," she whispered. "Alina. This is your father." Alina's eyes widened. She looked at the man, then back at her mother, then back again, as though she were trying to understand what she was seeing. "Really?" she asked softly. The prince knelt in front of her. "Yes, really," he said gently, though inside his mind was racing. The resemblance was unmistakable. The same eyes, the same small smile, the same determination hidden behind. Innocence. I don't understand. How did this happen?" Sarah took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "It's a long story," she said. "One I never wanted you to know. We tried to survive. We tried to stay away. But I guess fate had other plans." Alina tugged at his sleeve. "Daddy, do you remember me?" she asked. The prince's eyes softened. He reached out to touch her cheek. I wish I could say I do," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But somehow, I feel like I've known you forever." The moment hung in the air, heavy and full of emotion. Around them, the mall buzzed with noise, but for a while, it seemed like the world had stopped. Every person in the lounge area could feel the gravity of this encounter, the reunion, the shock, the uncertainty, and the unspoken love that was already forming. The prince's phone buzzed. He ignored it for a moment, unwilling to let the outside world intrude on this fragile, powerful moment. Sarah could feel his hesitation, the weight of his life pressing against the simplicity of this small child's world. He finally said, looking at her with a strange intensity, "I need to know." "Why now? Why today?" Sarah shook her head. "I don't know," she admitted. "We were just living our lives. I never expected to see you again, and she never even knew who you were until today." Her voice trembled. "I thought I was protecting her. I thought keeping the truth away was the right thing to do." Alina held onto his hand. "I didn't know," she whispered. I felt it. I had to call you Daddy." The prince blinked, stunned by the purity of her words. He looked at Sarah again, his gaze searching, questioning, but also understanding. There were no lies here, no deceit, only survival, love, and an innocent intuition that had brought them back together. Minutes passed in silence, but it was a silence that carried the weight of everything. The security guards shifted nervously, unsure of how to respond. Mall shoppers peeked through the glass walls, curious and whispering. Phones were still recording the scene outside, but the prince didn't care. He focused entirely on the two people in front of him, the daughter and the mother he never knew he missed so deeply. "Alina," he said finally, "can you tell me everything? From the beginning? How did you end up out there? How did you find the bag?" His tone was gentle yet urgent. He needed to understand the story, and more importantly, he needed to ensure her safety. Alina took a deep breath and began to explain. She spoke of their life in the small apartment, the endless struggle, the laughter despite hardship, the nights she cried herself to sleep while holding her broken doll. She spoke of her mother's tireless work, her gentle words, and her unwavering love. And then she told him about the bag, how it had fallen from a delivery van, how she found it, and how instinctively she had returned it even though she didn't know who it belonged to. God, as she spoke, the prince listened, eyes wide, heart aching. He felt a strange mix of guilt, admiration, and awe. Guilt for never being there, admiration for her courage, and awe at the undeniable strength of both mother and daughter. Sarah's face glistened with tears as she watched Alina speak. She could feel the bond forming between her daughter and this man, the connection she had once feared might never exist. Finally, when Alina finished, the prince sat back, his hands trembling slightly. I need to make this right," he said softly. "I don't know how, but I promise I will. You don't have to be afraid anymore. I will be here for both of you." Sarah's knees trembled. The relief, the fear, the hope all collided in her chest. She wanted to believe him, but after years of struggle, years of lies and hiding, it felt impossible, and yet she saw the sincerity in his eyes. The world outside didn't matter anymore. What mattered was this moment, this promise, and the uncertain future they were about to face together. Alina smiled timidly, a mixture of hope and fear in her eyes. "Really?" she asked. "Really," he said, smiling back. And in that instant, something inside her shifted. For the first time in her life, she felt safe. She felt seen. She felt loved. Little did they know, this was just the beginning. Secrets, hidden truths, and shocking revelations were waiting to unfold. The simple act of calling a stranger Daddy had opened the door to a future no one could have imagined, and within hours, their lives would change forever. The prince's words hung in the air, heavy with possibility, but the reality of the situation was still overwhelming. Sarah sat frozen, unsure how to respond, while Alina clung to her hand, her small fingers gripping tightly as if afraid this dream might disappear. For a moment, the bustling mall seemed to vanish, leaving only the three of them in a bubble of shock, curiosity, and fragile hope. The prince leaned back slightly, taking a deep breath, as though trying to steady the whirlwind of emotions inside him. He had never felt such a mixture of awe and regret. "You don't understand," he began softly, looking at Sarah with pain in his eyes. "I should have been there. I should have known. I should have protected you both." He shook his head, unable to continue for a moment. "All these years, I never imagined I'd meet you like this. That my daughter would find me in such an unexpected way." Alina blinked, her innocent eyes wide as she tried to process his words. She had grown up believing her father was gone, believing he had abandoned them. Now here he was, standing in front of her, speaking words that felt almost unreal. She wanted to scream, to cry, to run into his arms, but she was still unsure. A lifetime of unanswered questions and suppressed pain had left a mark on her small heart. Sarah, sensing her daughter's hesitation, gently squeezed Alina's hand. "It's okay, sweetheart," she whispered. "He's here now. That's what matters." Her voice was steady, though inside she felt as though she were walking a tightrope between fear and hope. She had spent years shielding Alina from disappointment, and now the very person who could make everything right was standing before them both. The prince knelt down again, closer to Alina's level. "I want to know everything," he said gently, his tone full of warmth and patience. "Every moment of your life, every hardship, every little thing that made you who you are. I need to understand because I want to help, and I want to make sure nothing bad ever happens to you again." Alina's lip trembled. For the first time, she felt like someone genuinely wanted to listen to her story, not just as a child or a poor girl, but as his daughter. She began recounting her life in small pieces, starting with the memories she could remember before Sarah shielded her from the truth. She spoke of the small room behind the bakery, the worn-out shoes that always gave her blisters, and the nights she and her mother stayed awake just to keep warm. Every detail painted a picture of struggle, courage, and love that the prince had never truly imagined. He listened intently, his expression changing with each word. At first, there was disbelief, then a growing sense of guilt, followed by deep compassion. He had lived a life of luxury and privilege, but he had never truly understood the weight of living with nothing. Alina's words were a mirror reflecting the harsh reality he had been blind to, and it filled him with determination. He would change everything, starting now. Sarah watched silently, her eyes filled with tears. She had lived through so many disappointments, so many moments where hope felt like a distant memory. Yet now, standing in front of her was a man who could provide the life she had always dreamed of for Alina, a life without fear, hunger, or uncertainty. And the strangest part was that she could see the genuine emotion in his eyes. He was not just a stranger. He was her daughter's father, and he seemed ready to accept the responsibility he had once abandoned. "Daddy," Alina whispered again, her voice soft but full of courage this time. Can we really be together now?" The prince's eyes softened, and he reached out to gently hold her hand. "Yes," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "We will be together. And I promise I will never leave you again." In that moment, Alina felt a sense of peace she had never known. She smiled through her tears, feeling her heart swell with hope. The small glimmer of happiness that had always been hidden under fear and struggle finally emerged. She could see it in her mother's eyes, too, a mixture of disbelief, relief, and gratitude, but the story was far from over. Outside the mall, cameras captured the scene. Phones were recording and social media. Notifications were already exploding. News of the poor girl calling a rich stranger daddy would spread like wildfire. While the prince wanted to protect their privacy, he knew that once this story went public, their lives would change forever. And that change could bring both opportunities and challenges. For now, he focused only on the two people in front of him, the daughter he never knew, and the mother who had kept her safe. He wanted to understand their needs, their fears, and their dreams. He wanted to bridge the gap of lost years and rebuild the connection that destiny had now forced into reality. The conversation continued. Hours passing as the three shared stories. Laughter, tears, and moments of silence. Each word deepened the bond between them. Each glance created unspoken understanding. The prince realized that this reunion was not just about wealth or status, it was about family, about making right what had once been wrong, and about creating a future where Alina could finally feel safe, loved, and valued. As the sun began to set, casting golden light through the mall's windows, the prince made a decision. He would take immediate steps to ensure Alina and Sarah's well-being. A private residence, financial security, access to education, and emotional support would be provided. But more than anything, he wanted them to know that he was here not as a distant figure of power, but as a father and a man who was determined to protect and cherish his family. Alina felt a strange mix of excitement and nervousness. Her life was about to change in ways she had never imagined. The fear that had lived inside her for years was slowly giving way to hope. She could barely comprehend the luxury and safety that awaited her, yet deep down she felt ready. For the first time, she felt seen, understood, and loved in a way she had never known. Sarah, though still overwhelmed, felt a sense of relief. The burden she had carried alone for years was finally lightened. She could see that this man, this prince, was sincere, and while challenges remained, she believed that together they could navigate them. The faint memories of struggle would remain, but they would no longer define their lives, and so, in that quiet lounge of the mall, a new chapter began. A chapter filled with hope, love, and the promise of a future that neither Elena nor Sarah could have ever imagined. But just as one chapter ends, the next begins, and the surprises, challenges, and revelations waiting for this newly reunited family were only just beginning. The days that followed were surreal for Sarah and Elena. The prince, whose real name was Prince Emmanuel, insisted they stay under his care in a beautiful mansion that seemed more like a palace than a home. For Elena, it was almost unbelievable. She went from sleeping in a small, leaky room behind a bakery to exploring a house with golden chandeliers, wide staircases, and gardens that stretched farther than her eyes could see. Every morning, sunlight streamed through enormous windows, painting the rooms in warmth and color she had never known. But it wasn't the luxury that amazed her most, it was the feeling of safety, of belonging, and of finally being seen by someone who truly cared. Prince Emmanuel, though used to wealth and privilege, found himself walking a different path now. He had spent decades learning the rules of royalty and business, but the rules of family, love, and trust were unfamiliar territory. Every morning he watched Elena move through the halls with wide-eyed curiosity, sometimes asking a million questions, sometimes quietly observing, and sometimes just laughing with pure joy. And every night he checked in with Sarah, wanting to ensure she was adjusting, wanting to prove that his intentions were genuine. He didn't just want to provide them with comfort, he wanted to earn their trust, to heal the wounds of the past, and to show that his absence had never been out of disregard but complicated circumstances that he could no longer explain. Elena, meanwhile, was learning about the life she never had. She met tutors, cooks, gardeners, and people who had worked for the prince for years. Everything was new, every experience extraordinary, but she never forgot where she came from. She often held her mother's hand tightly, whispering small reminders about their old life, their struggles, and the moments that had made them stronger. The prince noticed these small gestures and admired the resilience in both mother and daughter. They carried hardship with dignity, and that dignity touched him in ways money or power never could. One afternoon, the prince decided to have a private conversation with Sarah. "I know this is overwhelming," he said gently. "You've carried so much alone. I want to make sure you have the support you need. But I also want to be honest about everything, about why I wasn't there, about the mistakes, and about what I hope for the future." Sarah nodded, tears threatening to spill. "It's been hard," she admitted, "more than you could imagine. But seeing Elena happy, it makes it worth everything. I want her to be safe, to be loved, and to grow up knowing she deserves the best." The prince reached for her hand. "She does deserve the best, and I promise I'll make sure she has it. But more than that, I want her to know that family matters more than wealth, more than titles, more than everything else. I want her to grow up knowing she is loved unconditionally, that mistakes of the past don't define us, and that honesty and courage are what truly shape a person." Sarah felt a wave of relief. She could finally breathe. The fear that had gripped her for years of being judged, of being separated from her daughter, of never finding hope, was slowly fading. For the first time in her life, she felt she could trust, feel safe, and let go of some of the burdens she had carried alone. Elena, unaware of the adult conversations, was exploring the prince's garden when she found a small fountain surrounded by blooming flowers. She dipped her fingers into the water, giggling as the droplets splashed against her skin. It was a simple joy, but one she had rarely experienced before. She looked up at the sky, feeling the warmth of the sun, and whispered to herself, "Everything will be okay now?" Evenings were the hardest for the prince, though. He would sit in his private study, thinking about the years he had lost, the moments he had missed, and the pain that Sarah and Alina had endured without him. He could not change the past, but he was determined to make the present and future meaningful. He knew that trust had to be earned, that forgiveness was a journey, and that love, even after years of absence, could grow stronger than ever. The first family dinner was filled with emotion. Alina giggled at the ornate plates. Sarah quietly marveled at the elegance, and the prince watched them both with an intensity that carried both pride and vulnerability. Conversation flowed easily at first, then became more personal as the prince shared stories from his childhood, his travels, and his regrets. Sarah and Alina listened, occasionally laughing, sometimes wiping away tears. The dinner table became a place of bonding, a symbol that despite past separation, connection could still be rebuilt, but not everything was smooth. The world outside the mansion continued as usual. Gossip spread about the poor girl who found a prince, and some questioned the authenticity of the story. The prince remained cautious, ensuring their privacy while letting the media know only what was necessary. He understood that protecting his family from unwanted attention was as important as providing for their needs. Yet inside the mansion, transformation was happening every day. Alina became more confident, learning new things, exploring the arts, and discovering talents she never had the chance to nurture. Sarah, too, found a renewed sense of purpose. She could finally rest, manage the household without fear, and focus on building a secure and happy life for her daughter. The bond between father and daughter deepened in ways that were both gentle and powerful. Late-night conversations, shared secrets, and quiet walks in the gardens allowed trust to grow naturally. The prince learned to be present, to listen, and to embrace the unexpected joys of fatherhood. Alina learned that family could mean more than survival, that love could be abundant, and that even the harshest past could lead to a beautiful future. In the final moments of the day, as the sun set behind the mansion and painted the sky with golden hues, Alina ran to the prince and hugged him tightly. "I'm glad you're my daddy," she whispered. Sarah watched, tears in her eyes, feeling an overwhelming sense of peace. The past could not be erased, but the present was full of promise, and the future, though uncertain, was brighter than they had ever imagined. That night, as they all sat together in the grand living room, a feeling of hope settled over them. The prince had found his daughter, Sarah had found a partner in rebuilding their lives, and Alina had found the family she had always longed for. They had been through fear, surprise, and disbelief, but now, together, they could face anything. The lost bag that brought them together had not only returned what was missing, it had restored faith, love, and connection in ways no one could have predicted. And though challenges remained, and life outside the mansion would continue to bring obstacles, one truth remained: kindness, honesty, and courage had the power to change lives forever. A single moment, a single word, Daddy, had rewritten their destinies. And for Sarah, Alina, and Prince Emmanuel, this was only the beginning of a story that would forever remind them, anyone who heard it, that miracles often come when least expected, and love can bridge even the widest gaps of time, distance, and uncertainty.